The silence in the house was suffocating. Ever since the accident that took the life of her daughter, Sophia, the home of Laura and Daniel had become a place of shadows and sorrow. The joyful sounds of childhood, the toys scattered across the living room, and the daily routines that once filled their lives were gone, leaving behind a void that seemed to consume everything. Laura spent her days in silence, barely able to leave Sophia's room, now a shrine to painful memories. The room remained untouched, with toys neatly arranged on the shelf and Sophia's favorite dress still hanging on the wardrobe door. Laura would sit for hours in the chair next to the bed, lost in thought, blaming herself for the accident. She had been driving that night, and although everyone insisted it was a tragic accident, Laura couldn't shake the crushing guilt that weighed on her. Daniel, on the other hand, tried to move forward. He believed Laura's grief was understandable, but she was trapped in a spiral of guilt that he couldn't break. He suggested therapy, but Laura always refused, claiming that she just needed more time. As the months passed, however, it became clear that Laura was sinking deeper into her pain. Then one night, as she lay in bed next to Daniel, Laura heard something. A distant voice, soft, barely a whisper. "Mom." The word echoed as if carried by the wind, far away but unmistakable. Laura froze, her heart racing. She glanced at Daniel, but he was still asleep. Perhaps she was dreaming, she thought, trying to dismiss the absurd idea forming in her mind. The next night, the same thing happened. This time, the voice was a little louder, clearer. "Mom." Laura shot up in bed, listening intently. The voice seemed to come from the hallway. She crept out of bed, her heart pounding, and stepped into the darkness of the corridor. The house was cold and still, but the voice continued. "Mom, where are you?" It was Sophia's voice. She was sure of it. Laura walked down the hallway, following the sound to Sophia's bedroom. She opened the door but found only the oppressive silence. The room was empty, as always. The small bunny-shaped lamp cast a faint glow over the room, but everything was as it had been. Laura's chest tightened, a confusing mix of grief and fear gripping her. "Am I losing my mind?" she wondered. She quietly closed the door and returned to bed, shaking. The voice of Sophia had been so real, so close, but Laura knew her daughter was gone forever. In the days that followed, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something else was in the house. She began staying awake late into the night, waiting, listening, and every time she heard the voice, it seemed to call her toward something she couldn't yet understand. The following nights became unbearable for Laura. The voice of Sophia, once distant and almost imperceptible, now grew clearer, echoing through the house, particularly in the early hours of the morning. "Mamai, where are you?" The voice came from the end of the hallway, sometimes downstairs, sometimes from within her own bedroom. Each time, Laura leapt from the bed, convinced that Sophia was somehow calling for her, needing her. She started to lose sleep, consumed by the idea that Sophia was lost, waiting for her to find her. Daniel, increasingly worried about Laura's emotional state, suggested she seek help from a therapist. He was convinced that her grief had overtaken her. "You need rest, Laura," he said gently. "These voices are coming from your exhaustion. Sophia isn't here anymore." But Laura couldn't accept that. The voices were too vivid, too real to be mere hallucinations. One night as Daniel slept, the voice came again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just calling for her, it was pleading. "Mom, find me. I'm here. Please come find me." The desperation in the voice struck her to the core, and Laura's heart clenched. "Sophia needs me. She's lost, and I have to find her." Laura shot out of bed and rushed into the dark hallway. Her hands trembled as she moved through the house, following the voice like a beacon. When she reached the end of the hall, something stopped her in her tracks. In the dim light, she saw a small shadow dart across the floor, running toward Sophia's room. The shape was small, like a child, playful, as if it were Sophia herself. "Sophia?" Laura's voice cracked as she called out, her throat tightening. She entered Sophia's room, but as before, the room was quiet and untouched. But this time, something was different. The air was colder, and a strange, unsettling presence filled the room. Laura scanned the room, expecting to see Sophia in her bed, but the bed was empty. The strange visions didn't stop there. During the day, she began seeing small figures in the corners of the house. She swore she caught glimpses of Sophia's reflection in mirrors and windows, or sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, a shadow running across the garden. The old photos of Sophia that filled the house seemed to watch her with an intensity Laura couldn't explain. The feeling of being watched became suffocating, as if Sophia's spirit lingered just out of reach, watching her every move. Laura's life was unraveling. She couldn't sleep, her nerves were on edge, and her mind was caught in a downward spiral of guilt and obsession. It felt like Sophia's voice was pulling her deeper and deeper into a place she might never escape from. One particularly cold night, Laura was more restless than usual. Sophia's voice had transformed. No longer the soft, distant whisper, it now sounded more urgent, almost angry. "Mamai, please come, I'm here. Why won't you find me?" It was as if Sophia were closer, as if she were just out of reach, waiting. With her heart racing, Laura got out of bed and hurried into the dark hallway. Daniel slept soundly, unaware of the terror consuming his wife. This time, the voice came from the attic, a place Laura rarely went. Sophia's voice guided her like a thread through the darkness, leading her up the narrow stairs to the stuffy, shadow-filled attic. Her hands shook as she opened the creaky door, a door that had not been touched in years. The attic was thick with dust and gloom. Old, forgotten memories were stored here, boxes of photos, worn clothes, and unused furniture. Laura's flashlight flickered as she scanned the room, searching for the source of the voice. In the far corner, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small wooden box, locked and hidden in the shadows. The voice of Sophia seemed to come from inside it. "Mom, I'm here." Laura's chest tightened as she approached the box. Every instinct told her not to open it, but the need to find her daughter outweighed the fear. The lock was old and rusted, easy to break. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, there was a collection of family objects. Among them was a doll that had once belonged to Sophia and an old, weathered leather journal. Laura recognized the journal immediately. It had belonged to her mother. Her hands trembling, she opened it, flipping through the pages that chronicled a past Laura had long tried to forget. The words revealed a terrible truth that Laura had buried deep within herself. The guilt she had felt over Sophia's death wasn't only about the accident. The journal spoke of a dark family secret, an incident from Laura's own childhood, a tragedy that Laura had repressed for years. Memories began to flood back in jagged fragments, like a long-forgotten door being opened. Laura remembered another child, her brother. His death had been the result of an accident, an act of neglect. The guilt had been buried so deep in Laura's mind that it had taken Sophia's death to bring it to the surface. The accident that took Sophia had reawakened the same guilt, a cycle of family trauma that Laura had tried to escape. The journal ended with her mother's confession about the weight of their family's tragedies. Laura finally understood that the voices, the visions, were a manifestation of the guilt she had carried all these years. Sophia, or whatever presence was mimicking her, was trying to force Laura to confront a truth she had long denied. Suddenly, the voice of Sophia shifted. It was no longer pleading, it was cold, almost vengeful. "You've always known, Mamai. Now it's too late." Laura felt the world around her collapse. The attic seemed to spin, and the weight of the journal in her hands became unbearable. The revelations inside crushed her under the force of years of repressed guilt. The truth was undeniable. She wasn't only responsible for Sophia's death, but for something far worse, a truth her mind had refused to process. Sophia's voice, once filled with love and longing, was now different. It had turned cold, filled with an accusation that Laura couldn't escape. "You always knew, and you let me go." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating like a curse. The presence she had felt wasn't just Sophia's memory. It was something darker, more vengeful, feeding on the guilt that had consumed Laura since the accident. Or maybe long before. Laura collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She finally understood that the voice she had been hearing wasn't just the echo of her lost daughter. It was the manifestation of her own guilt, her mind's desperate attempt to make sense of the unbearable weight she had been carrying for so many years. The spirit of Sophia, or whatever presence haunted the house, wasn't calling for her to find and save her. It was something far darker, born from the family's cycle of unresolved trauma. "Forgive me," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Sophia, to the brother she had lost long ago, or to herself. Perhaps it was all of them. The attic was silent, but the oppressive weight of the unseen presence remained, lingering in the cold air. Then, the temperature in the attic dropped sharply. The shadows around her seemed to close in, and the flashlight flickered again, its light casting eerie, dancing shapes across the dusty walls. "Now you have to choose," Sophia's voice, or what remained of it, finally spoke, clear and severe. "You can let me go, or stay trapped in this pain forever." Laura's breath caught in her throat. She realized now that this wasn't just about releasing Sophia. It was about releasing herself from the endless cycle of guilt, of repeating the same mistakes. The voice, the visions, the creeping shadows, all of it had been leading to this moment. She had to make a choice. Could she let go? Could she finally face the truth about herself, about her past, and about the role she played in the deaths of both her daughter and her brother? The choice seemed impossible. Either she would confront the painful truth and free herself from it, or remain shackled to her guilt, losing her mind to the darkness in the process. Taking a deep, trembling breath, Laura rose to her feet. Her fingers slowly closed the journal and returned it to the box. She had spent so many years running from the truth, but she couldn't hide any longer. "I let you go, Sophia," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a quiet resolve. "And I forgive myself." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the oppressive weight in the attic lifted. The coldness began to fade, and the air seemed lighter. Sophia's voice didn't return, but Laura knew deep inside that her daughter's spirit, if it had truly been Sophia, was finally at peace. Weeks passed, and the house of Laura and Daniel stood abandoned. The couple had left, moving far away, leaving behind the home that had once been their sanctuary. Laura understood that she might never fully escape the scars of her past, but leaving that house behind was the first step toward healing. The windows of the empty house collected dust, and the doors remained closed. But the neighbors occasionally whispered about strange sounds at night, soft, distant echoes of a child's voice. A faint, almost inaudible mom that seemed to drift through the dark, deserted halls. Eventually, the house went up for sale, and a new family, drawn by the low price, moved in. A little girl skipped through the corridors, excited about her new room. On the first night, as the house settled into silence, the girl lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. But then, from somewhere down the hallway, she heard a soft whisper, distant yet unmistakable. "Mom."